Your neighbor isn't dangerous until he starts measuring your grass with the intensity of a crime scene investigator. And trust me, this is just the prelude to the real insanity ahead. 1. A man once declared war on his neighbor because a single dandelion drifted across the property line like a tiny yellow invader breaching a national border, prompting him to draft a handwritten cease and desist letter written with the gravity of a Cold War treaty. The letter accused the neighbor of biological lawn contamination, demanded reparations in the form of weekly weeding sessions, and threatened escalation to HOA authorities as if NATO were waiting in the bushes. And the best part is that the neighbor wasn't even home when the rogue dandelion launched its unapproved migration, meaning the entire diplomatic meltdown was triggered by a flower seed doing what flower seeds do. But the guy insisted it was a deliberate act of horticultural sabotage designed to undermine his lawn's structural integrity, proving that some people believe Mother Nature herself is part of an organized conspiracy against them. 2. A woman became convinced her neighbor's wind chimes were a psychological operation crafted specifically to destroy her inner peace, claiming the soft metallic jingling sounded like a weaponized lullaby engineered to erode her sanity. So she documented every breeze in a color-coded spreadsheet, complete with estimated wind velocity and emotional impact scores, as though she were preparing evidence for a meteorological courtroom, eventually demanding the chimes be removed because no one needs that much whimsy. And when the neighbor politely refused, she escalated by leaving anonymous notes that read like ransom letters for the concept of serenity, all because a $12 garden decoration had dared to exist within audible range, creating the world's only known situation where good weather was the enemy and a gentle breeze became an accomplice to emotional terrorism. 3. A guy launched a full diplomatic crusade after discovering his neighbor's garden gnome had rotated approximately 30 degrees overnight, insisting the gnome was spying on him and collecting data for unknown adversaries, possibly the HOA or the federal government, depending on which paragraph of his complaint you read. He took photos, circled them in red like a conspiracy theorist highlighting UFO evidence, and even placed masking tape on the ground to track the gnome's movements, despite the simple fact that the gnome weighed 18 pounds and hadn't moved since the Clinton administration. But his paranoia escalated so dramatically that he built a makeshift cardboard privacy barrier resembling a grade school science fair presentation, all to protect himself from a statue whose biggest crime was existing in a mildly different direction than the day before. 4. A neighbor dispute once ignited because a man believed his neighbor's recycling bin was staring at him disrespectfully, which is impressive considering the bin had no eyes, personality, or motive beyond holding cardboard boxes. Yet he insisted the angle at which it sat on the curb conveyed aggressive posture, prompting him to drag his own bin into increasingly bizarre counterpositions as if reenacting a territorial standoff between two apex predators. And he even emailed the city demanding guidelines on bin orientation etiquette, which is not a real thing, though he argued passionately that unsupervised bins could cause neighborhood psychological strain, as though plastic containers were silently waging emotional warfare, leading everyone else on the street to reach the same conclusion. The only hostile object in the argument was the man making charts about garbage receptacle body language. 5. A woman once filed a noise complaint because her neighbor's goldfish swished too loudly, which would be astonishing if true because goldfish produce roughly the same decibel level as a whisper from a cloud. Yet she claimed the gentle sound of water filtering through a tank was creating marine-based insomnia, leading her to demand the fish relocate to a more acoustically appropriate area, which is code for farther away from me. And when the neighbor explained that fish tanks cannot be silenced without killing the fish, she suggested installing tiny noise-canceling panels around the bowl like it was a recording studio for aquatic jazz musicians, turning a harmless pet into the center of an absurd debate that ended only when the landlord confirmed that water, in fact, is allowed to make water sounds and cannot be evicted for swimming too enthusiastically. 6. A man became enraged after his neighbor's shadow, yes, the literal shadow of a house, briefly crossed his lawn in the late afternoon, claiming it disrupted his solar access rights and caused his grass to enter a state of emotional dormancy, a phrase that exists nowhere except in the creative void inside his head. He demanded the neighbor reduce the height of their home by at least 2 feet to restore the sanctity of his photosynthesis rituals. And when informed this was physically impossible, he began calculating projected shadow lengths and presenting them like damning legal exhibits, ultimately threatening to sue for sun theft, a crime unrecognized by every legal system on Earth, but deeply real to a man who believed the sun existed for his personal convenience, and any momentary shade constituted a cosmic betrayal. 7. A woman launched an all-out campaign against her next-door neighbor for hanging laundry on a clothesline, arguing that the sight of socks drifting peacefully in the wind destroyed her visual quality of life, prompting her to take daily photographs as evidence of textile misconduct, and she insisted the flapping fabric created a chaotic energy vortex that interfered with her meditation practice, refusing to acknowledge that the real disruption to tranquility was her multi-page manifesto against underwear drying in sunlight. After the neighbors suggested she simply not stare directly at the clothesline, she claimed the garments were performatively present in her peripheral vision, thus forcing her spiritual collapse and transforming the most ancient, mundane human chore into a battlefield where cotton briefs became weapons of aesthetic terrorism. 8. A particularly devoted lawn enthusiast once accused his neighbor of grass plagiarism after noticing their yards were the same shade of green, insisting the neighbor had copied his mowing pattern, watering schedule, and overall grassy aesthetic, like a botanical identity thief. He actually requested the neighbor choose a new visual theme for their yard, perhaps leaning into a more rustic brown palette to avoid confusion. And when the neighbor refused to abandon the color, green, long considered the default setting for grass, he went door to door seeking witnesses who could testify that he was the original curator of the neighborhood's emerald ambiance, effectively turning a shared climate and shared biology into a trademark dispute that would make even actual lawyers roll their eyes into another dimension. 9. A neighbor once tried to ban another resident's porch light on the grounds that it was too optimistic, claiming the soft, warm glow beaming from the front step created unrealistic expectations for nighttime morale, which is perhaps the most poetic way anyone has ever said, "I don't like brightness." He argued the light trespassed into his emotional space by illuminating his shrubbery in a way that felt performatively cheerful, as though the bulb were taunting him with hope, and he demanded the neighbor switch to a more appropriate tone, like a dim red bulb that shows a mature understanding of darkness, turning what should have been a simple illumination choice into a bizarre philosophical debate about the ethics of lumens in suburban ecosystems. 10. A man became furious when his neighbor placed a decorative welcome mat reading "Home Sweet Home" on the porch, insisting the sentiment was passive-aggressive messaging directed at his own household, which apparently was not sweet enough to merit such branding. He claimed the mat implied moral superiority and accused the neighbors of weaponizing cozy language to shame him. And he retaliated by placing his own mat that read "Home Neutral Territory," escalating the passive aggression into a full-blown mat-based war, complete with periodic mat repositioning that he documented like battlefield maneuvers, all because one household dared to express benign domestic cheer, while the other interpreted it as an emotional attack that required swift and immediate countermat measures. 11. A couple once threatened legal action because their neighbor's bird feeder attracted birds that occasionally flew over their driveway, alleging the birds were violating airspace boundaries and depositing unwanted commentary on their car windshield, which they viewed as avian harassment. They demanded the feeder be removed, relocated, or converted into a training facility to teach birds more respectful flight paths, as though sparrows were tiny airline pilots ignoring runway protocol. And when the neighbor pointed out that birds exist independently of human zoning preferences, the couple created hand-drawn flight maps showing the illegal trajectories, ultimately proving that the only creatures behaving irrationally were the humans attempting to negotiate with gravity, wildlife, and the entire concept of the sky. 12. A neighbor once complained that the sound of another household's laughter on their patio was too recreational, claiming it created an atmosphere of unregulated joy that threatened the tranquility of the street. She argued that laughter should occur indoors, in appropriate acoustic environments, and insisted the carefree chuckles drifting through the air sounded like mockery directed at the emotionally burdened, which was her poetic way of saying she preferred silence over happiness. When the neighbors suggested she simply close her windows, she replied that joy travels through walls, implying that human cheerfulness has the same penetrating power as gamma radiation, and submitted a written complaint that basically asked the HOA to regulate other people's good moods. 13. A man once attempted to issue his neighbor a written citation, self-printed naturally, because their sprinkler mist drifted 6 inches beyond the property line during a windy afternoon, insisting this was an act of unauthorized hydration and demanding reimbursement for the water theft, even though the water in question had already evaporated. He argued that the mist altered the microclimate of his yard and disrupted his personal weather system, which is a bold claim for someone who thought barometric pressure could be violated by a sprinkler. And when the neighbor refused to pay for the stolen humidity, he installed a row of makeshift plastic shields resembling riot gear for grass, turning a basic irrigation system into the centerpiece of a suburban arms race over atmospheric moisture. 14. A woman once launched a dramatic moral crusade because her neighbor's Halloween decorations included a plastic skeleton lounging in a beach chair, which she claimed was historically inaccurate and therefore offensive to the integrity of the holiday, insisting skeletons have no business relaxing since, thematically, they should be suffering. And when the neighbor explained that it was meant to be funny, she doubled down, arguing that the skeleton's posture conveyed disrespect toward this concept of mortality, turning a $9 seasonal decoration into an existential crisis. She escalated the conflict by printing pamphlets urging neighbors to protect the cultural authenticity of spookiness, proving that nothing drains the fun out of a holiday faster than someone treating foam bones like sacred texts. 15. A particularly imaginative neighbor once accused the family next door of atmospheric theft because he believed their backyard grill was trapping all the good smells in its immediate area, depriving him of what he termed fair olfactory enjoyment, as though scent distribution were governed by federal regulation. He argued that grilling created a monopolized aroma zone that violated the principles of community smell sharing, and he demanded they adjust their cooking location to ensure equal gustatory opportunity, despite having no interest in joining them for dinner. When they continued using their own patio, he attempted to build a crude, scent-redirecting barrier out of plywood and cardboard, transforming an ordinary cookout into an absurd debate over who owns the rights to the air's flavor profile. 16. A man once tried to have his neighbor cited for unauthorized architectural whimsy because they painted their front door a cheerful shade of yellow, arguing the color injected unregulated optimism into the street and clashed with the community's emotional color palette, which was apparently limited to beige, beige adjacent, and moral despair. He insisted the yellow door created mood inflation, meaning it forced others to feel brighter than they wished, and claimed the color psychologically trespassed into his living room when sunlight reflected off it, turning each sunrise into a personal crisis. He even suggested the neighbor repaint the door in a more emotionally mature hue, sparking a debate that ended with the realization that the door wasn't the issue. The issue was one man's deep fear of anything remotely cheerful. 17. A woman once attempted to ban her neighbor's hummingbird feeder because she believed the hummingbirds were too competitive, claiming the sight of tiny birds racing toward sugar water created an environment of hostility that permeated the neighborhood. She said the rapid wing beats triggered her stress response and encouraged reckless behavior among local wildlife, as though gazing upon nature's smallest athletes would radicalize the squirrels, and she proposed replacing the feeder with calming bird imagery, such as printed photos of peaceful doves, which is a truly fascinating misunderstanding of how animals work. Her neighbor declined the suggestion, leading her to warn that the hummingbirds were developing territorial personalities, proving that the only creature exhibiting dominance issues was the human trying to police the emotional tone of birds barely larger than a ping-pong ball. 18. A man once tried to convince an entire cul-de-sac that his neighbor's compost bin was summoning feral energies because a single raccoon had the audacity to appear on camera one night, prompting him to print grainy screenshots like he was presenting evidence to a paranormal investigation board. He insisted the raccoon's expression indicated malicious coordination and argued that composting was essentially feeding an underground wildlife rebellion. And when the neighbor explained that decomposing carrot peels are not known catalysts for organized animal warfare, he countered by installing a motion-activated sprinkler aimed exactly at the property line, claiming it would disrupt enemy formations, leading everyone else on the street to conclude that the most feral thing in the neighborhood wasn't the raccoon. It was the guy trying to declare martial law on biodegradable waste. 19. A woman became absolutely convinced her neighbor's car horn was strategically timed. Psychological warfare, even though the horn only sounded when the neighbor accidentally hit the lock button twice. But she insisted no one could be that clumsy and accused them of orchestrating a campaign of audible intimidation, which is a bold accusation about a Honda Civic whose greatest ambition was starting in cold weather. She filed a complaint claiming the double beep pierced her soul like a microwave finishing cycle with malicious intent. And when the neighbor pointed out that literally every modern car makes that noise, she dramatically argued that this particular car had a tone of mockery, like it was laughing at her from the driveway, proving that some people don't need enemies, just a loud noise and an imagination with too much free time. 20. A man once declared a full winter emergency because he believed his neighbor's snowman stole the design of his own snowman from last year, claiming the use of a carrot nose and pebble eyes constituted creative theft, as though snowmen were copyrighted intellectual properties instead of temporary ice sculptures doomed to melt by March. He insisted his snowman had a distinct artistic direction and accused the neighbor of trying to sabotage his legacy as the block's premier snow artisan, even creating a side-by-side comparison chart that looked like a deranged forensic lineup of frosty suspects. And when the neighbor shrugged and said snowmen tend to look like snowmen, he declared this response proof of guilt, turning what should have been a charming winter moment into a courtroom drama starring two lumpy frozen spheres and one man dangerously close to losing a custody battle over an icicle. 21. A couple once demanded their neighbor stop using their backyard grill because the smell of barbecue created unrealistic expectations for dinner, claiming the aroma drifted into their home and made them crave ribs, which they considered emotional manipulation via scent. And they suggested the neighbor switch to neutral-smelling foods, possibly steamed vegetables or boiled chicken, to maintain fairness in the culinary landscape. When the neighbor naturally declined to ruin their own meal for the sake of someone else's olfactory insecurity, the couple started blasting a fan toward the grill as if they were redirecting a toxic cloud, insisting it was self-defense. All while the rest of the block quietly agreed that the only thing needing ventilation was this couple's profoundly dramatic relationship with smells. 22. One particularly ambitious neighbor attempted to sue the family next door because their tree leaned in a threatening manner, claiming the slight natural tilt created a menacing aura, and projecting that the tree was psychologically looming, preparing to one day fall with malicious intent rather than, gravity. He paced around taking photos from angles that made the trunk look like it was preparing a tactical assault, and he even measured the tilt degree like he was analyzing a criminal's escape trajectory, insisting the tree was planning something. And when the neighbor suggested he was imagining danger where none existed, he accused them of aiding and abetting the tree, proving that the only thing with malicious intent was his determination to prosecute nature for existing imperfectly. 23. A neighbor once ignited a territorial conflict because someone dared to park their car 1 inch, 1 literal inch, closer to the property line than usual, prompting him to come outside with a measuring tape like a suburban traffic warden fueled entirely by caffeine and resentment. He insisted that inch set a dangerous precedent that would eventually lead to parking anarchy. And he lectured the driver about the importance of respecting invisible boundaries, which is a rich concept considering the boundary existed only in his imagination and his personal tape measure theology. He even started documenting daily parking angles as if conducting a vehicular census, which ultimately convinced everyone that the most dangerously misplaced object on the street wasn't the car. It was his sense of proportion. 24. A woman once attempted to outlaw her neighbor's garden hose because she believed the green color clashed with the natural vibrancy of the terrain, claiming the shade of green was too artificial to coexist with organic greenery. A fascinating argument that somehow assumes hoses must blend into the environment like military camouflage. She argued the hose interrupted the visual narrative of her yard, which is a poetic way of saying she didn't like seeing something that wasn't hers, and she demanded the neighbor switch to a beige or emotionally neutral hose to maintain aesthetic harmony, only to be informed that hoses aren't curated museum pieces but tools for moving water, which made her pivot to the bold claim that the hose invited visual chaos, proving some complaints are less about the hose and more about one person's inability to accept the existence of colors they didn't approve. 25. A man once accused his neighbor's dog of smirking at him, claiming the dog's facial expression displayed antagonistic intent, which is impressive considering dogs have exactly 2 expressions, happy and food-motivated, He insisted the smirk was a form of canine disrespect, escalating to the point where he wrote a letter demanding the dog receive disciplinary training in humility, whatever that means. The neighbor calmly explained that the dog had simply been panting in the sun, but the man declared this a convenient excuse, as though the dog was running a psychological operation from behind the fence, and he began walking around with sunglasses so the dog wouldn't read his emotions, solidifying his role as the only mammal in the conversation, exhibiting truly concerning behavior. 26. A neighbor once sparked a conflict because he believed the sound of his neighbor's windmill lawn ornament stole his personal peace, claiming the soft spinning noise siphoned away his mental energy reserves, which raises the fascinating question of what kind of energy system he believes his brain operates on. He argued the windmill created a suburban vortex of agitation and demanded the neighbor install a brake system on a decorative object weighing slightly more than a bag of chips, insisting its constant rotation symbolized the futility of his daily struggles, which says much more about him than the windmill. When the neighbor refused to tamper with an $18 decoration, he sent a formal complaint stating he could hear the windmill judging him, proving the only object spinning out of control was his imagination. 27. A woman insisted that her neighbor's recycling habits were too enthusiastic, claiming the cheerful sound of clinking bottles on Monday mornings created an atmosphere of smug environmental superiority, and she argued that recycling should be done quietly and modestly, as though the neighbor was bragging via aluminum. She believed the sound personally criticized her own lifestyle choices, transforming normal waste management into a moral referendum she definitely wasn't invited to participate in, and she even threatened to report the neighbor for performative sustainability, a phrase that perfectly captures the remarkable ability some people have to manufacture offenses out of healthy, normal behaviors. The neighbor continued recycling, and the woman continued glaring, insisting the bins sounded self-righteous, in ways only she could detect. 28. A man once became enraged because his neighbor installed a small solar light along the walkway, claiming it disrupted the nocturnal ambiance of the street by introducing an unauthorized glimmer of hope, which he apparently found emotionally exhausting. He argued the faint glow undermined his nightly routine of brooding on the porch, insisting the light was optimism pollution that violated his right to a properly gloomy environment, and he demanded the neighbor replace it with something less cheerful, preferably a dim lantern that emitted the emotional energy of a tax audit. The neighbor declined, the light stayed, and he spent the rest of the month shielding his eyes dramatically whenever he walked past it, like a Victorian widow encountering an unsanctioned sunbeam. 29. A neighbor dispute escalated to legendary status when a woman accused her neighbor's newly planted shrubs of leaning suggestively, claiming the slight tilt implied some form of botanical provocation, which is a remarkable interpretation of plants simply obeying gravity and wind. She insisted the shrubs were invading her visual boundaries and demanded they be repositioned to stand at attention, as though Flora should salute her when she walks by. When the neighbor explained that shrubs do not possess moral intent or posture preferences, she accused them of enabling the foliage, generating the first known case of someone being offended by the body language of plants, which is ironic considering she was the only one projecting human emotions onto objects that lack actual spines. 30. A man once lodged a complaint claiming his neighbor's trampoline disrupted the air quality of his yard, not through pollution, but because he believed the bouncing redistributed molecules in a way that made his atmosphere feel less stable, which suggests an understanding of physics crafted entirely from late-night conspiracy forums. He demanded the trampoline be used only during approved atmospheric windows, a schedule based entirely on his vibes rather than science. And when the neighbor ignored his homemade environmental regulations, he began standing at the fence line with a solemn expression as though observing an ecological tragedy unfold, completely ignoring the fact that the only disturbed molecules belonged to him. 31. A neighbor once argued that another household's welcome sign saying "gather" was an act of social manipulation, claiming it pressured the entire block to be friendlier than they naturally were, which he considered emotional coercion. He insisted the sign created an expectation of neighborliness, a level of social responsibility he was not willing to entertain, and he demanded it be replaced with something more realistic, perhaps "mind your business" or "enter at your own risk," claiming this would set a truer tone for the neighborhood. The neighbor politely declined to recalibrate their hospitality for the sake of one man's commitment to misanthropy, leaving him to glare at the sign each morning like it was a political rival. 32. A woman once accused her neighbor's potted cactus of being aggressively spiky, claiming the mere sight of it disrupted the emotional feng shui of the street and created a hostile visual landscape, despite the cactus being a foot tall and about as threatening as a grumpy zucchini. She demanded the neighbor relocate it somewhere less confrontational, perhaps behind a fence or inside a meditatively neutral room, arguing that cacti send a message of unfriendliness, which is hilariously ironic because the only unfriendly presence in the dispute was the woman lecturing a desert plant about its personality. The neighbor refused, and the cactus continued living rent-free in her mind. 33. A man once waged a silent war against his neighbor's seasonal wreaths, claiming constant decoration turnover created emotional instability in the neighborhood narrative, as though the block were a prestige TV show requiring tonal consistency. He insisted too many wreaths signaled dramatics, whimsy, which he considered inappropriate for residential environments, and when the neighbor switched from a spring wreath to a summer one, he taped a note to their door reading, "Choose an identity," which is a fascinating demand to make of a floral arrangement. The neighbor naturally ignored him, and he spent the rest of the year analyzing wreath rotations like a cultural critic, reviewing a show he hates but refuses to stop watching. 34. A neighbor dispute erupted when a man insisted that his neighbor's tiki torches were summoning mosquitoes from other zip codes, claiming the flames created a beacon of insect opportunity, acting like an all-you-can-eat buffet sign for bugs who then migrated into his yard, even though every scientific explanation provided to him refuted this theory. He argued passionately that the torches created a mosquito superhighway, which he illustrated on a hand-drawn map showing various fictional insect traffic patterns, and he demanded the neighbor extinguish the torches to reduce regional mosquito flow, as though he were the reluctant mayor of Bug City trying to curb tourism, proving that the only creature overreacting to the situation was bipedal and deeply committed to blaming others for the weather and nature. 35. A man once accused his neighbor's rain gutter of weaponized dripping, claiming each drop hit his driveway in a pattern he described as passive-aggressive Morse code, which he believed was sending him subliminal messages about lawn maintenance. He even recorded the drips and slowed them down like he was analyzing alien transmissions, insisting the rhythm carried emotional hostility. And when the neighbor explained that rain falls downward due to a fun little concept called gravity, he rejected the explanation, arguing that gravity doesn't choose sides, and that the neighbor had engineered the trajectory of the water to psychologically exhaust him, ultimately leading him to install a tarp so oversized it looked like he was trying to protect his driveway from an incoming meteor instead of drizzle from a gutter that never once conspired against him. 36. A woman once sparked a neighborhood-wide conflict because her neighbor's mailbox was too cheerful, claiming the bright blue color radiated forced positivity into her morning routine, which she described as emotionally invasive sunlight. And she insisted mailboxes should be somber, dignified, and preferably shaped like disappointment, which is apparently the vibe she wanted greeting her each day. She sent an anonymous letter accusing the mailbox of emotional disruption, which is quite a flex considering she willingly wrote to an object that exists solely to receive letters, not to read them, before demanding the owner repaint it a more respectful hue, ideally beige, because nothing says harmony like sucking the joy out of even a postal container, ensuring every passerby knows exactly who fears color the way others fear wild animals. 37. A neighbor became absolutely convinced someone next door was stealing his silence, claiming the faint hum of their air purifier siphoned away his inner quiet reserves like noise-based vampires, which is impressive considering the purifier was quieter than a polite sneeze. He even charted his personal peace levels on a graph that looked like stock market volatility, but was actually just him reacting to normal household sounds, and he demanded they turn off the purifier before 7 p.m. so he could rebuild his quiet inventory, as if tranquility were a pantry item you could run out of, leading everyone else to conclude that the only thing he was low on was perspective. 38. A man once accused his neighbor's garden stepping stones of implying a shortcut through his property, claiming the stones subtly suggested a path that encouraged illegal foot traffic, despite the fact that no one ever crossed his yard, wanted to cross his yard, or even thought about his yard. He insisted the stones invited lawlessness, as though decorative rocks held persuasive power over human behavior, and demanded the neighbor rearrange them into a layout that discouraged trespassing fantasies, which he believed were blooming in the minds of passersby, proving that sometimes the only trespassing happening is inside a person's imagination, where stepping stones are apparently running a recruitment campaign for petty crime. 39. A woman once declared war after her neighbor installed a decorative fountain that produced a gentle bubbling sound, which she described as auditory arrogance, claiming the fountain created an atmosphere of show-off serenity that mocked her realistic lifestyle. And she insisted the bubbling water was pretentious, which is a stunning insult to a liquid that has zero interest in performing. She demanded the neighbor switch to a less elitist water feature, maybe a bird bath with humble energy, and argued that the sound made her home feel unintentionally spa-like, which she said threw off her daily emotional calibration, proving that for some people, peace and quiet are just more things to be angry about. 40. A neighbor once attempted to enforce a self-created curb aura standard, claiming the neighbor 2 houses down had a trash can with suspiciously confident posture, which allegedly disrupted the emotional energy of the block. He said the trash can stood there like it owned the street, and insisted it be replaced with one that understood humility, preferably something dented to convey a more relatable personality. When no one complied with this unsolicited spiritual sanitation guideline, he printed pamphlets detailing appropriate and inappropriate trash can vibes, which the entire street ignored, leaving him to mutter about unchecked garbage ego, while everyone else enjoyed the blissful normalcy of not assigning personality traits to bins. 41. A man once lost his mind because his neighbor placed a single solar-powered lantern in the yard, claiming the lantern taunted the moon, which he believed created celestial tension that affected his sleep. He argued the moon deserved respect, and the lantern's glow challenged its authority, which is a poetic take on a $14 garden light, doing absolutely nothing except existing. When the neighbor politely declined to extinguish the lantern for the sake of lunar diplomacy, the man began wearing sunglasses at night to reduce cosmic hostility, proving the only thing disrupting the cosmos was his personal gravitational pull toward nonsense. 42. A woman once demanded her neighbor remove a plastic flamingo because it encouraged reckless tropical fantasies, claiming it disrupted the region's climate authenticity, which is hilarious. Considering the flamingo wasn't trying to relocate Florida, it was just standing there, minding its molded plastic business. She said the flamingo destabilized local expectations by implying sunshine and margaritas in a town known mainly for potholes, and she insisted the neighbor replace it with something geographically responsible, like a decorative pine cone, proving that nothing kills fun faster than someone determined to enforce realism on a lawn ornament. 43. A man insisted his neighbor's door wreath mocked the passage of time, claiming seasonal decorations made him feel pressured to be emotionally synchronized with the calendar, which he considered coercive. He argued that the sight of a winter wreath in December was calendar propaganda, and that swapping it for spring flowers was emotional whiplash, and he demanded the neighbor commit to a single year-round wreath to maintain psychological continuity, because apparently his entire sense of stability hinged on what other people hang outside their doors, leaving everyone else to quietly hope he never discovers the existence of holiday-themed dish towels. 44. A woman accused her neighbor of excessive seasonal enthusiasm because they carved 2 pumpkins instead of 1, claiming the dual pumpkins created a competitive decorative environment, pushing her to either elevate her own decorations or risk looking emotionally uninvested in autumn, which she considered an unfair psychological burden. She demanded they remove 1 pumpkin to balance the community's festive expectations, and when they refused, she retaliated by placing an uncarved pumpkin on her porch with a sign reading, "This is enough," proving that nothing captures the spirit of fall quite like passive-aggressive squash. 45. A man once declared his neighbor's porch swing a menace to neighborhood momentum, claiming the subtle back-and-forth motion created a hypnotic rhythm that threatened productivity, insisting the gentle sway encouraged relaxation at a pace he personally found threatening. He argued that seeing someone gently rocking disrupted his workflow, even though he had no visible workflow to speak of, and demanded the neighbors restrict swing use to non-visible hours so he wouldn't be tempted into idleness, making it clear that the swing wasn't the one struggling with productivity. The guy watching it was. 46. A neighbor once attempted to enforce a uniform curtain transparency policy, claiming the varying levels of opacity on nearby windows created a visual patchwork of inconsistency that offended his aesthetic equilibrium, which he acted like was a federally recognized condition. He even took photos of everyone's windows and annotated them like he was grading a school project, assigning failing marks to anything sheer, patterned, or slightly wrinkled, and demanded the block adopt a single approved curtain material so the street could achieve visual unity, because apparently nothing screams harmony like forcing 14 households to shop for the same curtains in bulk. 47. A woman became convinced her neighbor's birdbath was gaslighting her, claiming the inconsistent water level made her question her memory, accusing the ceramic bowl of emotional manipulation via fluid dynamics, and demanding it be removed for the sake of mental stability. She argued the water's gentle fluctuations were psychologically destabilizing, ignoring the radical concept of evaporation, and she insisted the neighbor replace the birdbath with a static decorative object like a rock, since rocks weren't known to play mind games, leaving the rest of the block to quietly wonder how she survived around literally any other object capable of changing slightly over time. 48. A man once got into a shouting match because his neighbor's lawn chairs were angled 5 degrees differently than his own, claiming the chairs sent mixed social signals and muddied the communal seating geometry of the street, which is probably the first time patio furniture has ever been accused of treason. He argued the angles suggested ambiguous hosting intentions, forcing him to realign his chairs daily to avoid emotional miscommunication, and demanded the neighbors adopt a standardized orientation that better represented community cohesion, proving that sometimes the only confusing furniture on the block is the one in someone's head. 49. A woman accused her neighbor's wind spinner of taunting her life choices, claiming the rotating pattern felt too ambitious and made her feel personally attacked by metal art, as though the spinner were critiquing her career trajectory with every turn. She argued that the spinning motion symbolized progress, which she didn't appreciate being reminded of, and demanded it be replaced with something less aspirational, like a stationary rock or an unpainted fence post, because apparently nothing threatens fragile stability quite like a decorative object having more movement in its life than she does. 50. A man once insisted his neighbor's driveway was smug, claiming the fresh seal coat gleamed in a way that broadcast superiority to surrounding concrete surfaces. And he described the shine as elitist pavement energy, suggesting it made his own driveway feel inadequate. He demanded the neighbor dull the surface to restore equitable texture distribution, which is just a fancy way of saying he wanted everyone's driveway to look equally tired. And when the neighbor declined to sabotage their own property for the sake of driveway socialism, he began throwing a light dusting of soil onto the asphalt at night, proving that you should never underestimate the lengths someone will go to defeat a surface with slightly higher self-esteem than theirs. 51. A woman waged the final glorious battle of neighborhood nonsense when she accused her neighbor's Wi-Fi network name, simply "good luck stealing this," of creating a hostile digital environment, claiming it projected aggressive cybersecurity energy into her home and made her feel judged every time she opened her laptop. She demanded the neighbor rename it something more supportive, like "You're doing great" or "Wi-Fi of friendship." And when they refused, she attempted to file a complaint alleging emotional disturbance via router messaging, giving the entire street the unforgettable moment of watching someone try to regulate personalized broadcast text that doesn't even physically exist in the world, ending the saga with the purest mic drop of suburban stupidity. The only neighbor dispute in history where the source of offense wasn't a fence, a plant, a noise, or a decoration, just a floating sentence in the air that her brain decided to take personally. 37 brain cells were harmed making this list, and none belong to us. Drop your own dumb neighbor saga in the comments and vote for the champion of chaos.